The best starting point here would be to hear what the vocals sound like in contrast to the work we have already done up until now. So we will take a quick listen to them inside the mix. Let's now hear the same vocals soloed.
Inside me, the music takes me, and we have become
Okay, it's pretty obvious that the levels are a problem and need to be fixed. So we will start work now on the first vocal to enter the song, simply entitled Vocals. These are our intro vocals, and we want them to be slightly wishy-washy, a bit dreamy and Celtic in feel. So we will mix and level this vocal appropriately. The very first thing I notice is that the vocal is placed very central, and we want this space to be saved for the main vocals that will enter later on. So we'll use some stereo widening on this vocal to solve this issue, but first, let's try and bring out the best that this vocal has to offer, and for this, we yet again need the help of our trusty analyst to guide us in the right direction. So let's bring this up now. And we will see where this vocal currently sits. Okay, there isn't really any domineering frequencies here, but the high end does have much more activity, so we will enhance on this, for the simple reason that this will allow the vocals to cut through the mix, as long as we don't interfere with the synth instruments that we have already placed there. So the analyst has told us where we probably should boost to emphasize on the vocals' current strong points. But in order to get the best results here, we need to solo this vocal track, along with the synth folder, and sweep the top frequencies and see what area opens up the space for this vocal to shine through. So we will head over to the Pro channel now and start work. The one thing we can do without reference to the analyst is roll off some bottom end and around 200 Hz to really clean out this area. Okay, so now we want to sweep the top. So we will come over to the high band and boost the gain to around 10, and have a relatively narrow Q at about 6.5. Let's again make sure this and the synth folder are both soloed, and play again, and this time sweep across the high band area and see what works best. Okay, we have found a nice sweet spot at around the 7K area, so we will refine the level and Q settings. We will leave the EQ for now and move on to try and balance out the levels and placement for this vocal. First, I want to show you a good trick to making quiet vocals even and punchy. For this, we need the help of the Sonitus EQ and the Boost 11. This is my favourite method for balancing out vocals, mainly for its simplicity and effectiveness. Undoubtedly, you could achieve the same result using a different technique, but I think this way is very straightforward. Okay, we want to bring up the sonatas EQ. First off, let's just trim some gain off this track to give us headroom, about -4 or so. And we are just going to raise the level on the EQ to around 7. This is all we are using this EQ for at the moment. There are other ways we could raise the gain without introducing the sonatas EQ, but this way, if we need an extra EQ for mixing, it means we already have one here ready to use. Okay, now we have raised the level, we want to bring in our boost 11. We will bring down the boost to about 3 and trim the output to about -14. What this method will do is, because we have upped the gain slightly with the EQ, the boost 11 will now squash all the sound back down again to all one level. It gives the vocal nice continuity. Let's hear this back now unsoloed and refine the boost 11 settings. Now let's move on to fixing the placement of this vocal, and for this we will introduce the Channel Tools plugin into the track. This time, however, we won't rely on a preset to do our work for us, but instead I will show you what we can achieve when we put a little more effort into deciding our own settings. So first, let's look at what the Channel Tools plugin actually does. Well, as you may already have figured out, its purpose is to widen and narrow the stereo imaging, but we can also achieve other effects by looking a little deeper into some of the other settings available to us. Now, the effect we are after for this particular vocal is a dreamy entrance that blends in with the vocals yet to come, and one of the great things about this effect is that it allows you to manipulate the left and right imagery totally separately. So what this allows us to do is create a delay effect that will have a kind of call and response feel. The vocals are one of, if not the most important section to mix. If you manage to get the vocals just right, sitting comfortably and balanced well, you will find the rest of the song kind of molds around it, which is why we will take extra care to mix these and take our time to experiment and try out different techniques, something essential and also enjoyably unavoidable. Okay, so first let's look at some of these settings. On the left we have our delay dials, split into left and right. This is where we can adjust the time delay between the left and right channels. On the right, what we have are the gain dials. Here we can adjust the level of each split channel from left to right, mid and side, and just below this we can alter how much stereo width we want to apply to each channel. It is within these three areas we will focus on getting the right sound we are looking for. First, let's make sure our vocal track is soloed, and let's make a quick loop so we can hear it repeatedly. Okay, so let's first bring our delay dials all the way down to 0, and we will turn on our metronome during playback so we can time this delay to fit the rhythm of our song. Let's now play the track and alter the dials to get the right delay we are looking for. We will also add some character, and delay is great for adding ambience and space within a mix. We will add in the sonatas delay. First we want to change the tempo of the rhythm that will be applied to the vocals. We want it to go half the speed of the tempo, so 61.5 should do the trick. We will set the feedback to about 20% and a mix of around 40% to make this effect stand out a bit. Let's have another listen to these changes.
And we have
Last but not least, let's add some reverb to add that dynamic Celtic sound we are after. For this we will use the Sonitus reverb. And let's play the track soloed and play with some of the settings to get the right effect we are after.
and we
These are sounding pretty good, so let's move on. Now, because the vocals we have just mixed are a prelude of what's to come, we want the illusion that the vocals are all blending together and are conforming as if one solid vocal. So we will turn to the backing vocals and mix these next. Specifically the droning vocals that appear over the verses. For the sake of not confusing anyone, we will call these backing vocals 2. The same process, more or less, needs to be taken on this, as do all the vocal tracks, which is to be EQ'd, levelled, and given some unique character to define it. However, having said that, we don't want to drift these vocals too much astray from the intro vocals, so we will mix these two together soloed. Our interest is in trying to blend the end of the intro vocals to the backing vocals too, so let's hear how they sound at the moment. The main issue is space. We want the backing vocals to occupy the same area in the mix, but first, let's more or less use the same EQ for this as we did for the intro vocals. So we'll roll off a 200 Hz high-pass filter with a narrow slope. And boost the high band at around 8 dB at 7K or so. Okay, now let's work on the stereo placement. As I said, we want it to be very similar to the intro vocals, however, we don't necessarily want the delay effect. So let's bring in the channel tools and make sure our delay is set to pre. Now we want to hear the separation in the left and right. This is after all how we hear the stereo effect, but without the delay times. So in the left delay dial, we will set a time of around 1.0. And on the right, we will set a delay of around 11.1. We will bring in the width a little too. The delay settings above should give us enough definition between the two channels to make out the stereo imaging, but without applying the gap between them. Let's see now how these two blend together. When soloed, I am hearing some high distortion in the top end. So what we will do is use a technique that will cut the very specific frequency that is causing the trouble. For this we will not be using the Pro channel, but instead a much more surgical EQ. So we'll bring up the Sonitus EQ and have a look. Most EQs are the same, and once you learned how to use one, you can pretty much find your way around most others. This one is almost a horizontal version of the Pro channel EQ that prefers a vertical look. We are using this EQ because of its high Q setting, allowing us to sweep across very specific frequencies. And what we are looking for are any harsh or unwanted noise. So just like the sweeping technique in the Pro channel, we will go over to band 5 and make sure our filter is on peak dip. This filter will allow us to set a very high Q and allow us the accuracy we require. Then we up the gain all the way and start sweeping until we start to hear artifacts in the frequencies. So let's make sure we are soloed, and let's loop a section from measure 13 to 17 and have a listen. We have found some harshness at around 10k, so all we do now is simply drag the gain all the way down to cut that frequency from the track. We now want to level this, so that the drone is at one constant level, so again we will use my favourite method with the Boost 11 and Tinnitus EQ. First let's drop back on the gain to about -2, and solo the backing vocals, intro vocals and synth, so we can blend all three together. Okay, let's open up the Tinnitus EQ we already have, and boost the output to around 5 or 6. Now let's introduce the Boost 11 and play the track and play around with the boost and output dials. Now let's add some more space to this track by adding some reverb. We will introduce a preset from Reverb inside the Pro channel. We want a plate reverb, and the female lead plate number 53. We will reduce the dry to around -8 and increase the wet to about 1.2. Let's have a quick listen to everything except the main vocals and see how everything blends. We will also tend to any leveling issues that we may have missed. I think this sounds great. Let's now move on to the main vocals. These, for obvious reasons, need to stand out much more than the others, but not too much that they sound too on top of the music and karaoke in feel. There is a very fine line between being able to hear the vocals over the music and making them sound detached and separate from the music, so we will proceed carefully. Let's mute all the other vocals and leave the main vocals and the music, and I have a feeling our first port of call will be leveling them. Let's have a listen. As I suspect, the levels need work, so yet again, let's introduce the Boost 11 and Tinnitus EQ. Okay, so first let's give our vocals an output boost with the EQ around 7 dB or so. And now let's replay the vocal and set the boost 11 settings.
Into the sea of bodies we dance, dancing our way into another place, a place for us alone. The tone keeps us there, our bodies nearly touching, and now I'm hardly breathing. I see you want it, come and show me, baby, take me there.
Okay, let's do some EQing and bring out the analyst for this.
Into the sea of bodies we dance, dancing our way.
We can see a lot of activity in the mid and low range, and not really all that much in the top end. Very similar to the other vocals we've mixed. So, similar to the other vocals, we will trim some low end with a high pass filter, again around 200 Hz or so. We will also attenuate some mid at around 450 Hz, not by much, but enough to calm down the activity there. And boost around 9K, a Q of around 6, and bring it up around 14 dB or so. And let's hear the results.
Away into another place, a place for us alone. The tone keeps us there, our bodies nearly touching.
Now to calm down some of the sibilance that may occur, we will use the PC2A leveler. This module has a unique feature that allows gain reduction across high frequencies thanks to the R37 screw. So we will turn this screw all the way to the left and set the gain to around 30. This adjusts how much makeup gain is introduced after compression, and we will set the peak reduction to around 70. This adjusts the threshold and gain reduction. Let's add some reverb now, and we will use the tinnitus reverb. Remember to also experiment with the different plugins that do similar jobs. You may prefer one over the other. I personally like to mix it up a little and use different reverbs throughout the mix to add definition. I also personally really like this reverb particularly. We won't add masses of reverb here, just enough to add this overall feel we are going for. So we will set the reverb to around -10 and leave the other settings on default for now. We will also add a touch of delay here. And just like the other delay we added on the intro vocals, we will introduce the tinnitus delay. And set the tempo to 61.5, remember half the speed of our project. Set the feedback to about 20%. And the mix to around 18%. Okay, last but not least, let's add some compression here. This will smooth out the vocal brilliantly and calm down any harsh levels that may occur. So yet again we'll use the PC4K S-Type bus compressor and dial in some settings. First let's move the compressor to the top of the chain. And we will set a threshold of around -35.4 dB. An attack of 0.7, a release of 0.5, and we will play the track again and dial in any makeup gain or adjust the other settings to refine the compression.
Take
Now we come to the last vocal, backing vocals. These are here to add harmony to the main vocals, so these have to sit just right in terms of level and placement if they are to complement the main vocals as they should. Let's hear what they sound like together soloed.
The sound of my life, and we have become one.
Okay, first things first, let's give them some space of their own. So we will introduce channel tools. A much simpler process this time. We will just use the increased width preset and bring the width in slightly to around 15.1 on both sides and leave it at that. Nice and simple, doesn't need to be complex, it just needs to add space. I'm also getting a lot of harshness around the mid section. You normally know when there is too much mid when you listen to the song through headphones and it hurts your ears and sounds overpowering. So we will introduce the tinnitus EQ because of its surgical ability and see where this harsh sound is coming from by sweeping the mid-range. So let's set this up and have a listen.
The sound of my life, and we have become one.
So around the 1K area was our trouble spot, and by widening the Q after cutting it, just tidies up any loose frequencies that may tail off and cause artifacts. Now because we have done this, I don't feel it needs a whole lot of EQ. So we will leave that out for the moment, and I think with the help of a little compression, we won't need to add the boost 11 on this track either. So let's head over to the EQ and add a compressor. I realise that I have used no other compressor except the PC4K S-Type. So let's use now the PC76U type compressor and dial in some settings here. Okay, so for this you can see that it is slightly different layout. The concept though is basically the same. In fact, if you look at this in the same context as the Boost 11 trick I used to level vocals, it makes a lot more sense. Just with a few more buttons to press and dial. You see, we use the input in the same way as I used the tinnitus EQ and just boost the incoming signal slightly. Then use the output dial as I would with the output inside the Boost 11 to hone down the dB back down again to a constant level. Then of course we have the usual attack release ratio and dry and wet. Also, if you've been watching this so far and not known what the ratio button does, it is there to determine how much gain reduction will be applied once the threshold is reached. Also, a ratio that says infinity to 1 on it is usually considered a limiter, as it will prevent the signal from going over the threshold. Okay, so let's set an input of around 14 dB. An attack of around 1. A release of around 500. And an output of 6.7 dB. We will leave the ratio in dry and wet alone. And finally, we will add some reverb, bring up the tinnitus, and just set a -10 reverb level. Okay, this concludes our vocal mixing. We will just take a quick listen to it all the way through though, because next we will be fine-tuning, so refine leveling, adding additional effects and adding some automation. So let's take a quick listen now and I will see you in a sec.